Hey guys, tonight we are stepping softly into the warm, humid air of a Victorian glass house, where thick green leaves stretch toward arched panes of wrought iron, and condensation drips lazily from overhead. You're standing in front of something both ordinary and utterly exotic to the 19th century eye, a banana tree, or more accurately, a banana plant, since technically it's a giant herb, not a tree. But tonight, let's not fuss over botanical precision. You're barefoot on tiled floors, the warm breath of the hothouse clinging to your skin. As we peel back the layers, sorry, couldn't resist, of how this tropical oddity ended up on British soil in the first place. You probably wouldn't survive this, by the way. Not the banana, but the Victorian travel conditions that brought it here. Weeks aboard a creaking ship, smelling of salt, cargo, and too many unwashed boots. But fear not. We're traveling by imagination tonight, not steamer trunk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey starts on a dock. Let's say it's Liverpool. The year is somewhere around the mid-1830s. There's fog, there are gulls, and there's a load of confused dock workers standing around a crate labeled Musa sapientum. No one knows how to pronounce it, but inside is the earliest recorded banana specimen to reach Britain in reasonably edible shape. By edible, we mean not entirely mush. Bananas, it turns out, were not a staple of early British diets. Until the 19th century, they weren't a staple of anyone's diet outside tropical regions, mostly because they don't travel well. Soft fruit, short shelf life, and long boat journeys were not a recipe for freshness. But in the age of imperial expansion, shipping routes began to tighten, and someone in the colonial outposts, probably a well-meaning but utterly sleep-deprived British botanist, sweating in Ceylon or Jamaica, decided the banana was too strange and delightful not to ship back home. The thing is, Victorians loved exoticism almost as much as they loved labeling things. Plants from across the empire were arriving in London and Edinburgh with names like Zingiber officinale and Citrus aurantium. But bananas were different. They were big, leafy, architectural, and confusing. Historians still argue whether the first banana eaten in Britain came from Jamaica, India, or Madeira. But what they do agree on is that the experience was underwhelming. The fruit, after all, was likely underripe and traveled in a less than glamorous state. Imagine biting into something halfway between a cold, boiled potato and a vaguely sweet cucumber. Still, people talked. Curiosity grew. By the 1840s, bananas were making appearances at fancy dinner parties, not necessarily to eat, but to show. Sometimes they were served in elaborate fruit towers, sometimes sliced awkwardly and paired with mustard, don't ask, and sometimes just placed on a velvet cloth like a botanical prop. If you were rich and bored in Victorian London, you could find your way to a greenhouse or public garden and see a banana plant for yourself. It might be leaning under the weight of its own odd little fingers, or standing tall and stubborn in a pot too small for its ambitions. Either way, it was the start of a fascination, not just with the fruit, but with the idea of bending nature, coaxing tropical life to bloom beneath gray British skies. In many ways, bananas weren't really about bananas. They were about power, the power to take something wild and remote and make it behave in Kensington. That was the true Victorian obsession. And let's not forget the design of the banana itself. Even today, it's a bit absurd. Bright yellow, crescent-shaped, self-packaging, no pit, in an era when most fruit came with a threat. Hard pits, sour tang, weird textures. The banana was weirdly smooth, almost indecently smooth. Victorian etiquette books danced nervously around the topic of how to eat one in public. A fork, a knife, a blindfold, no one quite knew. Of course, bananas weren't entirely unknown to Europe. They had made scattered appearances through Arabic trade centuries earlier. But Britain in the 19th century, that's when things took root, quite literally. By 1852, the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew had not just one, but several species of banana growing under glass. Some were fruiting, some were decorative. All were the botanical equivalent of a humble brag. Oh, this? Just a Musa paradisiaca. Quite a temperamental little plant. But we manage. Quirky tidbit for the evening. The early Victorian banana plants were often gifted human names by their caretakers. One famous specimen in Edinburgh was reportedly called Mrs. Rutherford by the gardeners, who swore she bloomed better when spoken to kindly. You can't make this up, or rather, you could, but someone already did. There's also some speculation, unconfirmed but deliciously believable, that Prince Albert himself once tried to grow a banana plant in a private conservatory, though whether it survived is unclear. The Victorians were excellent at documenting things, but not always good at admitting failure. What they were good at was romanticizing, and few things were as ripe for metaphor as a strange fruit from distant lands, struggling to thrive under cold glass and careful hands. The banana became a symbol, not just of botany, but of Britain's growing obsession with bringing the empire home, one potted plant at a time. The dockhands, of course, didn't care. Neither did the sailors who hauled it, or the farmers who lost their crops when demand shifted toward export bananas. But here, in the comfortable glow of a storytelling evening, you do care, because every step of that banana's journey to Britain has been paved with curious ambition, unintended consequences, and the human urge to tame nature with a very large magnifying glass. And as the night stretches ahead, you'll walk further into the world of Victorian banana gardens, where glass ceilings weren't just metaphors, and even the fruit came with drama. You step slowly along the pebbled path of a Victorian conservatory, glass panes arching high above you, mist clinging softly to every surface. The air smells faintly of damp soil and lemon balm, but it's the towering banana plants that draw your eye, broad leaves unfurling like emerald fans, their waxy surfaces dripping with condensation. In this place, the air doesn't belong to Britain. It's borrowed, imported, steamy and slow, like the tropics trapped in a bell jar. Now imagine you're not just an observer, you're one of the workers. You spend your days in these steaming, halls, dressed in a shirt that's too starched for comfort, pruning leaves that could double as umbrellas, all while trying not to sneeze from the ever-present pollen and peat. You're underpaid, overworked, and deeply suspicious of the one gardener who insists on talking to the bananas. Because yes, as we touched on before, there was a widely whispered belief among Victorian horticulturalists that plants responded to human voices, especially exotic ones, especially ones struggling to bloom in foreign soil. Some keepers swore that a kind word or a dramatic reading of Tennyson could coax a reluctant banana plant to flower. Historians still argue whether this was just sentimental nonsense or an early and unscientific stab at what we now know as plant acoustics. Sound does affect plant behavior in certain contexts, but whether or not Mrs. Rutherford bloomed better when serenaded with poetry is still, let's say, up for gentle debate. Still, what the Victorians lacked in hard science, they made up for in flair. The banana became a kind of living exhibit. You couldn't just display it, you had to narrate it. Garden tours often included theatrical recitations about the plant's journey from faraway lands, complete with maps, gestures, and the occasional tall tale about jungle adventures. It was a botany lesson, dressed as bedtime theater, and these weren't small operations. The banana houses at Kew, Edinburgh, and other botanical centers were engineering marvels, vast domed constructions of iron and glass designed to trap heat with the obsessive fervor of a child cupping fireflies. To walk into one was to step into an alternate climate, one carefully curated and closely monitored. The steam pipes gurgled underfoot, the vents wheezed gently above, and someone was always checking a thermometer with a look of grave concern. Fun fact, the Great Palm House at Kew Gardens was so large and so warm that some workers preferred it to their own homes in winter. At least in the glass house, your nose didn't freeze overnight. In the middle of all this, bananas grew slowly, deliberately, as if suspicious of their new surroundings. Unlike other tropical plants that flowered eagerly, the banana needed just the right balance of heat, humidity, and patience. And when it did finally bloom, when that single, strange purple pod opened to reveal rows of delicate fingers, the event was noted in ledgers, whispered among staff, and sometimes reported in the local paper. Of course, these bananas weren't the sweet, seedless Cavendish you know today. Early banana imports often included varieties like Gros Michel, richer in flavor, more prone to bruising, and hiding a peppering of tough little seeds in every bite. Some were stringy, some were bitter, all were novel, and novelty mattered. Victorians, particularly the upper classes, adored the thrill of the new. New smells, new fabrics, new fruits. Bananas were all three. Their scent was alien. Their skin peeled in perfect strips. No knife required. And their taste? Well, that depended. If ripe, creamy, cloying, sweet. If unripe, vaguely like starch-flavored soap. The learning curve was steep, which led to one of the era's more niche dinner party challenges: how to serve the banana. There was no etiquette entry yet. Was it dessert or side dish? Knife and fork affair? Or finger food? Could it be flambéed? Or, of course, heaven forbid, pickled? There's a surviving account of a London host in 1864 attempting a banana custard pyramid, which collapsed spectacularly halfway through the evening, ruining both the dish and the host's pride. That particular culinary venture did not catch on. Meanwhile, outside the dining rooms and greenhouses, bananas were becoming a quiet status symbol, a plant that required constant care, special conditions, and a glasshouse to even exist in Britain. You weren't just showing off fruit. You were showing off engineering, wealth, influence. You were part of an elite club of people who could literally reshape the weather in a single room just to grow something ridiculous. And for the scientific community, bananas held deeper meaning still. They were a botanical puzzle. They didn't produce seeds in the traditional way. They reproduced mostly by cuttings or suckers, shoots from the main plant. This baffled many early researchers. How could something so alien, so uncooperative, have managed to survive for millennia? One fringe theory at the time suggested bananas were proof of divine humor, a fruit so bizarre, so structurally flawed, that it could only exist as a kind of heavenly prank. Others insisted they were a gift, designed perfectly for the human hand and digestive system, a natural blessing. The truth, as always, was more complex, but in these banana houses, theories swirled like steam, and if you stood long enough in the warmth, you'd hear them all, muttered by gardeners, speculated upon by visiting scholars, or mused over by women with lace gloves and parasols who absolutely weren't supposed to be eavesdropping. The banana, then, was never just about fruit. It was about belief. Belief in empire, belief in nature's secrets, belief in the idea that anything, no matter how strange, how tropical, how stubborn, could be made to thrive under glass with the right amount of money, patience, and monologue. And so, you wandered deeper into the steamy corridors, past ficus and fern, past orchids and pepper plants, until the air feels thick with ambition. Somewhere, someone is tuning a barometer. Someone else is reading aloud to Mr. Thompson, a particularly finicky dwarf banana cultivar. And you, well, you're just beginning to understand that this story peels back more than one layer. You trail your fingers along the wrought iron railing that wraps around the central greenhouse stairwell. Warmth rises from below, swirling with the scent of wet bark and sugar-slick fruit. Somewhere in the canopy above, water drips rhythmically from a banana leaf the size of a rowboat's sail. You tilt your head back, and for a moment, all you see is green. Victorian Botanical Gardens didn't just grow plants, they staged them. Everything was intentional. Each banana tree was a performance piece. Every frond lit like a theater set under panes of misted glass, and at the center of it all was you, or at least the version of you who might have been a corseted visitor in 1864, fanning yourself with a borrowed brochure while trying to pretend the humidity didn't make your cravat go limp. You pass a low bench where a small placard boasts, Musa paradisiaca, banana of paradise. There's no fruit on the tree today, but the leaves whisper secrets all the same. Your guidebook informs you, in an unapologetically wordy paragraph, that bananas are monocarpic, which means they flower once and then die. A bit dramatic, really, but very on brand for the Victorians. Despite their flair for the theatrical, the gardeners behind the scenes were the true heroes. They created microclimates before climate control was even a concept. They adjusted vents by hand, opened floor hatches to control airflow, and even rigged up elaborate pulley systems to lower buckets of water down from ceiling tracks, all to keep a banana tree comfortable. The plants were more pampered than some members of parliament, a mainstream historical fact you might not know. Queen Victoria herself visited the Royal Botanic Gardens more than once, and on at least one occasion, she was shown the banana specimens in the Palm House. Legend, and possibly some light exaggeration, says she asked if they were fit for a lady. No one recorded her thoughts on the taste, but it's safe to assume she didn't peel her own. It wasn't just about the fruit. Bananas in Victorian gardens were symbols of empire, evidence of reach and control. They whispered of distant colonies, of unseen labor, of ships crossing oceans. If a garden in England could grow a tropical fruit, what couldn't England do? It was, in a way, a polite botanical power flex, and yet not everyone was convinced the banana belonged. One particularly snarky letter to the Horticultural Chronicle described bananas as grotesque and overgrown, accusing them of lording about the conservatory like jungle tyrants. There were debates over whether they were elegant enough to be housed with orchids and camellias. Historians still argue whether this botanical snobbery was fueled more by aesthetics or the social discomfort of importing something so closely tied to colonized labor. You stop near a gardener's station, a low wooden desk stacked with hand-labeled jars, dried soil samples, pest repellent powders, and a jar of something labeled slug deterrent, test batch number 3. There's also a little brass bell, likely used to summon assistance. You don't ring it. You're far too polite. And also, it might summon something damn. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the mid-1800s, there was a brief fad of gifting banana plants to newlywed couples as symbols of fertility and exotic luck. This backfired spectacularly when one overly enthusiastic recipient attempted to plant hers in the drawing room fireplace. The story made it into a gardening column with the scathing title, "Let us not confuse the tropics with the hearth. Lesson learned." You continue walking, noticing how the light changes as you move. The further you go into the banana enclosure, the more golden everything becomes. Not from actual gold, of course, but from the filtered sunlight playing through layers of leaf and glass. It feels like stepping into an old oil painting, one with far too many shades of green. Each banana tree seems to have its own personality. Some stand tall and proper, like they've read the etiquette manual. Others lean at suspicious angles, plotting mischief. One plant even appears to have grown a slight curl at the end of its leaf, a kind of leafy smirk. You wonder if the gardeners named them. You would. You'd call that one Eleanor, and the one by the misting valve Harold. Harold looks like he's seen things. And here's something else. Bananas in Victorian greenhouses were rarely eaten. They were there to be admired, not devoured. In fact, many visitors had no idea what a banana actually tasted like. Fresh imports were expensive and fragile, bruising if you so much as looked at them sternly. When they did arrive in markets, they were often overripe, wrapped in cloth, and sold one at a time like they were jewels. People didn't know how to peel them. Some tried slicing them lengthwise. Others boiled them. Yes, boiled. Imagine the disappointment. It wasn't until much later that bananas became a household snack. At this stage in their English life, they were mostly silent divas, growing in foggy rooms, admired from behind a low rope barrier. You sit down on a bench tucked between two banana beds. The bench is cool. The stone under your feet is mossy. Somewhere, a trickle of water flows quietly into a drain. You lean back and listen to the rustle of leaves, the quiet creak of glass, and wood settling for the night. You imagine a Victorian gardener passing by, humming under his breath, checking notes on a clipboard. He gives a little nod to the banana tree you're seated next to, perhaps his favorite, and mumbles a compliment about its leaf symmetry. You smile. You understand. It's easier to talk to plants than people sometimes, especially ones that grow without judgment. You wonder how many whispered secrets these banana trees have heard over the years. Botanical gossip, maybe, or scandalous stories shared by visitors, hoping the fronds wouldn't tattle. You reach out and gently tap the edge of a low leaf. It trembles slightly, as if considering your presence, then returns to stillness. Somewhere outside the glass walls, London hums and coughs and clatters onward. But in here, you're wrapped in the warm breath of the tropics, held still by the quiet dignity of a banana that's not in a hurry to do anything at all. A light drizzle begins tapping on the glass overhead, creating a soft rhythm that folds into the warmth of the garden. You tilt your head toward the sound, hypnotized by the gentle percussion. It's like the banana trees are getting their lullaby, a raindrum lullaby for plants that once stood under monsoons and now sway gently in an English-engineered climate. You shift your gaze back to the foliage, watching how the droplets race down the arched panels above, tracing long, wandering paths before dropping to the soil below. And here you are, watching banana trees in a greenhouse during a Victorian rain. You and a bunch of tropical strangers, locked in what could only be described as a very slow tea party. Bananas may have brought a splash of the jungle to the UK, but they also brought with them an agricultural headache. While they looked grand, tall, broad, almost heroic in their stature, they were astonishingly delicate. Victorian greenhouses were more hospital than habitat. The caretakers developed schedules that rivaled modern medical charts, watering times, ventilation cycles, leaf inspections, pseudostem support. Ah yes, the pseudostem. That thing that looks like a trunk but isn't. You run your hand along it gently. It's made of tightly packed leaf sheaths, not wood, and it's full of surprises. One gardener's journal from 1872 recounts the horror of slicing open a pseudostem, only to release a herd of tiny beetles that had taken up cozy residence inside. The gardener reportedly screamed, dropped his tea, and refused to re-enter the banana wing for 3 days. Historians still argue whether this entry was exaggerated or just very, very British. But bugs weren't the only concern. Temperature control was a daily battle. The heat needed to be consistent, but the cost of coal was high. Sometimes fires went out, leaving the plants shivering by dawn. Gardeners would rush in at sunrise to check for leaf wilt, which sounds a little like a plant hangover, and honestly, kind of looked like one too. Curled edges, droopy posture, a general don't talk to me energy. They even brought in night watchmen just to check the boilers. Imagine that as a job title: Midnight Banana Boiler. You picture a Victorian man in thick wool with soot-smudged cheeks trudging through corridors at 3 a.m. to poke at flames and mumble insults at clunky metal pipes. He probably had no idea he was a part of botanical history. He was just keeping the bananas warm. And oh, how those bananas were admired. Guests of wealth and title strolled through the glass houses with parasols and powdered noses, pointing at the curving stalks of not quite ripe fruit, with expressions somewhere between awe and mild suspicion. Some even posed for sketches in front of them. You imagine being painted beside a banana plant, desperately trying not to sweat through your collar, while pretending to discuss its botanical dignity. A mainstream historical note: the Royal Horticultural Society hosted an exhibit in 1862 entirely devoted to exotic edibles, and the banana display caused quite a stir. One reviewer wrote, "It resembles neither tree nor herb, yet rises with commanding elegance, bearing fruit as if by enchantment," which is Victorian for, "Wow, this plant is weird and impressive." Back in the soil, strange things were afoot. Gardeners experimented constantly with soil composition. Some swore by manure-heavy mixes, others preferred coconut husk layering, and at least one attempted banana plant hydroponics using an old brandy barrel. That last one didn't go well. The plant turned yellow in protest and refused to grow past knee height. It was named Old Sulky and retired to a lesser greenhouse. There were also rumors, tiny, whispered, root-level rumors, that some gardens were engaging in secret seed exchanges. Gardeners from different estates would smuggle rare banana cultivars wrapped in damp cloth inside hollowed-out books or tins labeled peppermints. This was, essentially, botanical espionage. You'd expect a plant-based MI6 to intervene, but alas, they were too busy figuring out how to keep orchids alive. And then came the naming wars. Victorians loved naming things: bridges, canes, houseplants. Bananas were no exception. You might stumble on a Musa Cavendishi, named for the Duke of Devonshire's head gardener, who apparently was better at cultivating than he was at naming. Some wanted to call bananas Adam's figs. Others proposed tropical plantain, or a few simply called them those strange yellow things. Historians still argue whether naming conventions reflected scientific precision or colonial vanity. But one thing's clear: everyone wanted to own a piece of the banana puzzle. As you walk deeper into the collection, you notice labels in varied handwriting styles, some neat and flowery, others rushed and blotted. One small wooden sign reads simply, "Don't touch. Harold bites." You blink. You remember Harold, the leaf-curled mischief maker from earlier. Seems you weren't the only one who saw personality in a plant. The drizzle outside grows heavier, turning the ceiling into a canvas of motion. Water blurs the outlines of banana leaves and softens their silhouettes into something dreamlike. You pause under one particularly tall specimen. It has a slight lean, as if it's listening to the storm. You do the same. There's something oddly comforting about being among plants that don't belong here, yet somehow thrive. They're survivors in slow motion, grown not just for science or beauty, but for the human need to gather the foreign and tame it, to place a bit of the tropics into a glass box and say, look, we did it. We made it grow. But the truth is, the bananas did most of the work, quietly, leaf by leaf, curl by curl. You find a gardener's journal tucked beside a watering pail, pages stiff with age. One entry, scribbled in messy ink, reads, Musa continues to surprise. Growth remarkable. Leaves 3 inches longer than projected. Recommend further observation. Also, Gregory still refuses to clean up beetle mess. You smile, and you sit. Because this is a story, you don't need to rush. Bananas didn't. Why should you? The rain has stopped. Or maybe it hasn't. You've simply stopped noticing. The rhythm of water on glass has become part of you now, as familiar as your own breath. The banana grove around you is still, the leaves slick and glossy, drooping with contentment. You almost envy their simplicity. Drink sunlight, drink water, grow tall, confuse Victorians. You stretch your legs a little and wander further, deeper into the heart of the greenhouse. The path curves now, leading you toward a narrower wing where the banana plants give way to experimental beds. You catch sight of something odd, a long wooden bench lined with pots, each with a miniature banana sprout poking out like green question marks. This is the nursery, the botanical baby ward, if you will. Each sprout is tagged with handwritten labels. Specimen number 73, Siam origin. No, 81, possibly West Indian hybrid? One simply says, who knows? The Victorians, bless them, tried to classify everything with a mix of precision and wishful thinking. Historians still argue whether these sprawling attempts at banana taxonomy were driven by genuine scientific curiosity or the irresistible urge to slap Latin on things to impress their peers. The obsession with cataloging had consequences. One famously tense argument broke out between 2 botanists at the Royal Botanic Gardens over the classification of a particular cultivar. One insisted it was a variation of Musa paradisiaca. The other, red-faced and flustered, called it an inconvenient impostor. They reportedly didn't speak again for 11 years, even though they worked on the same grounds and once shared a lunchroom kettle. Drama, meet dirt. You move on past the sprouts, into a corridor flanked by etched glass panels that catch the fading light in unexpected ways. It feels almost like stepping through stained glass into another layer of the world. Banana shadows cast strange shapes, the kind of silhouettes that might look like jungle spirits or just overly dramatic ferns, depending on how much sleep you've had. Now you're near a display table. Mounted here are banana products, part curiosity, part Victorian showmanship, fibers spun from banana stalks, woven into rough cloth that was, allegedly, once used to make ceremonial robes in the Philippines. A banana wine bottle, sealed with wax, its label faded, but still legible. Fermented extract, not for tea. You wouldn't drink it now, unless you wanted to meet history a little sooner than planned. There's also banana paper, pale, almost translucent, and a bound book titled On the Commercial Possibilities of Musa Species by someone named Everett Plumbridge. Sounds fictional, doesn't it? Like a man born in a waistcoat. But he was real, and his dream was big, to turn bananas into empire-fueling commodities. Paper, clothing, ropes, medicine, and of course, dessert. Yes, dessert. Here's your quirky fact. A cookbook from 1879 includes a recipe for banana mousse with claret drizzle. Apparently, it was all the rage at country houses trying to impress dinner guests. A sort of look how worldly we are moment. Tropical fruit, French, technique, and a splash of wine to ensure the Victorians didn't have to chew too earnestly. Quite a few visitors probably pretended to love it, while silently wondering what bananas were supposed to taste like. And as you peer at the worn pages of that cookbook, you realize that the banana's rise to botanical celebrity wasn't just about science. It was about class. Owning bananas, or even glimpsing them, became a kind of social currency. Greenhouses filled with banana plants became bragging rights, and banquets featuring banana pudding? Well, that was the Victorian equivalent of serving imported caviar with monogrammed napkins. But not everyone was impressed. Some traditionalists resisted the banana's infiltration of their botanical spaces. One Garden Society publication from the time gently referred to them as bold intruders with exaggerated proportions, which, let's be honest, is a great line for both banana plants and certain uninvited dinner guests. This skepticism didn't stop one London gentleman from commissioning an entire wing of his estate dedicated to tropical fruits. Legend has it that he hosted evening banana viewings by candlelight with string quartets playing in the background. Guests sipped sherry and admired the curve of a ripening fruit as if it were a sculpture. You imagine the whispered commentary. Marvelous stem density. Wouldn't you agree? Oh yes, positively heroic. Meanwhile, the gardeners behind the scenes were sweating through their waistcoats, desperately trying to keep the tropical illusion alive. They had their own little wars against mold, fungus, and the dreaded root rot. Banana roots are notoriously finicky. Too dry, and they sulk. Too wet, and they rot with the vengeance of an Elizabethan ghost. Some greenhouses developed early warning systems. A sudden slump in leaf posture, sound the bell. A faint musty smell near the roots. Bring in the chalkboards. One head gardener reportedly developed a method of listening to the root beds by pressing an old stethoscope to the soil. He called it botanical auscultation. Historians still argue whether this was a stroke of genius or a lonely man with too much time. You step past another potted plant, this one a little scraggly, perhaps a runt of the batch. Its label has been scratched out, but it leans toward the light with quiet determination, and you can't help but admire its pluck. Not every banana makes it to the grand exhibit. Some just live their lives on the fringes, overlooked, but still growing. The walkway curves again, and now the light changes. You've reached the part of the greenhouse where sunset filters through stained glass panels shaped like palm fronds. The glass throws golden green shadows across the stone floor. For a moment, everything feels suspended. A Victorian dream trapped in amber. You pause here, letting the warmth soak into your bones, and listen to the echo of footsteps, yours and those of countless others before you. They all walked this same path, marveling at a tropical plant that had no business surviving the English climate, but did so anyway, with a little help, a lot of warmth, and some charmingly obsessive humans. And you, like them, are part of that story now. Welcome to the long, sleepy tale of bananas. In the age of corsets and top hats, there's still much to see, more to imagine, and just maybe a little more to dream about. Your footsteps soften now as the gravel underfoot fades to brick, still slightly damp with condensation. The evening light stretches thinly through the banana fronds, and everything glows as if washed in gold leaf. You shift slightly, hearing the subtle creak of ancient iron framing overhead, a greenhouse sighing gently as it settles into the cool hush of dusk. Victorian glasswork, as delicate as lace and just as moody, seems to whisper, "Take your time." You wander into a new wing of the gardens, this one a little more secluded, a little less polished. Here, things are less curated and more experimental. You get the distinct impression that this is where the real work happened, away from the high society guests and their monocle polishing. The air smells earthier here, not quite rot, but close. The scent of living soil, damp cloth, banana sap, and quiet ambition. This section housed the famed banana acclimatization experiments. You crouch to examine a modest plaque on a wrought iron stand. It reads, "To tame the tropics." And really, that was the heart of the whole Victorian banana project. Not just to grow it, not merely to name it, but to own it, to take a fruit from equatorial jungles and convince it to behave in Surrey, to civilize a banana, if you will, a phrase that could launch 1,000 dissertations. You run your finger gently along a stone bench, the kind someone might have sat on while taking meticulous notes in a leather-bound journal. Indeed, just above it is a glass-fronted cabinet filled with faded volumes, their spines red like a bedtime story for over-caffeinated gardeners. Yield charts, 1883, 1892, humidity studies in musa beds, the chill resistance of tropical flora, Volren III. One particularly worn book has no title, just a banana leaf stamped into the leather. You imagine some passionate horticulturist thumbing through its pages by candlelight, logging everything from leaf width to the emotional state of a particularly stubborn sprout. Victorians did love their personification. A sullen plant was a melancholy specimen, a flourishing one, positively jubilant. You pause beside a strange object mounted on a plinth. It looks like a large wooden wheel with handles. A contraption, certainly. The label underneath reads, "Experimental Banana Pot, Spinner, 1876. Apparently, the idea was to rotate banana pots slowly throughout the day, so each side received equal sunlight, thus producing perfectly symmetrical fruit. Elegant theory. Horrible. In practice, one vigorous spin, and you'd have bruised bananas and an irritated gardener with a sore back. Historians still argue whether this invention was the result of genuine innovation or a bored groundskeeper looking to make a name for himself. And really, who can blame him? Working with bananas in a chilly British climate was no walk and hide park. These plants were moody guests. They demanded stable humidity, loathed frost, and responded to the slightest draft with dramatic leaf drooping. The caretakers had to become part botanist, part therapist. Many used makeshift steam pipes under the beds to simulate jungle warmth. Some even imported manure from nearby farms or zoos to enrich the soil and release gentle heat. One overly enthusiastic gardener layered elephant dung under the banana plants. It worked well until the odor began wafting into the conservatory tea room. Guests were reportedly unsettled. Now, in this quieter space, you notice rows of framed watercolors on the wall, illustrations from early plant catalogs. The bananas are lovingly depicted in hues of yellow and green, their proportions idealized, their leaves sweeping like ballroom gowns. Beneath each drawing is a delicate script: Musa sapientum, Musa cavendishi, Musa textilis. So many varieties, so many attempts to map paradise. And here's where the story turns philosophical, as it often does when you're sleepy and surrounded by plants that look like they've known secrets for centuries. You realize that bananas weren't just plants to the Victorians. They were metaphors for exploration, for exoticism, for man's noble battle against nature, even if that nature was just a slightly fussy fruit tree. Remember that this was the age of empires, trade routes, colonies, botanical theft. Collection. Bananas weren't native to Britain, nor even to most of the empire. But if you could grow one in your garden, you were part of the grand imperial narrative. You'd brought the jungle home, yet there was also unease. Some Victorian journals expressed discomfort at how quickly bananas matured. A whole plant could grow, fruit, and die back in a single season. Too fast, too wild. One commentator wrote, "There is something uncouth in its haste," which is possibly the most British complaint ever leveled at a tropical fruit. You wander past a final display, a mannequin dressed in a linen apron and straw hat, standing beside a wax banana plant. It's almost comically lifelike. The mannequin holds a watering can mid-pour, his face frozen in an expression of serene competence. You can't help but nod to him. It feels polite. Before drifting back down the corridor toward the main wing, outside, the first hints of night have crept in. The glass above has gone navy blue, and the leaves are beginning to lose their detail, blending into soft silhouettes. Somewhere nearby, the hiss of a gas lamp ignites, a warm amber glow pooling across the brick floor. You're struck by how much effort it took to grow something so simple. A fruit you can now buy by the bunch in plastic netting, available year-round at any supermarket. But once, it was a marvel, a curiosity, a status symbol, and behind every yellow arc was a web of gardeners, explorers, botanists, and dreamers with dirty fingernails and grand ideas. One of them, perhaps, stood exactly where you're standing now, brushing soil off their trousers, frowning thoughtfully at a plant that refused to flower. Maybe they cursed under their breath, maybe they smiled and muttered, "Tomorrow." And you, well, you can simply admire the legacy, the warmth, the absurdity, the strangely beautiful fact that for a brief moment in time, Victorian society held its breath for the fate of a banana. Let that image linger as you turn back toward the fading light, your thoughts gentle and unhurried, your mind winding down, leaf by leaf, you move onward through the curving greenhouse, each step cushioned by the moss, soft floor, and wrapped in the cozy embrace of damp air and faint chlorophyll. The lighting dims just a little more, golden edges giving way to a dusky green-blue that makes you feel like you're walking through a watercolor. Somewhere behind you, a watering system kicks on with a soft hiss, misting the air like a tropical sigh. This wing of the gardens houses not just bananas, but their Victorian rivals, pineapples, mangosteens, even the elusive breadfruit, all lined up in quiet competition. But bananas always had the upper hand in popularity. There was something delightfully absurd about them. Their comical shape, their waxy sheen, their tendency to rot spectacularly if left alone for too long. Here, among their leafy competitors, bananas stood as the fruit of the people, or at least the fruit of ambitious gardeners with big dreams and zero chill. What you might not expect, though, is that bananas weren't only garden trophies. No, they also became centerpieces in Victorian etiquette. That's right, table manners got a fruity update. In fact, banana etiquette became something of a hot topic. You reach a small reading nook where an open book lies under a gentle spotlight. The page reads, "To eat the banana properly, one must peel it with a knife and fork, never the fingers." This was published in 1879. You blink, imagine being told that peeling a banana by hand was low class. Bananas, you see, were exotic, and exotic things, in the British mind, required rules to render them civil. Some households even practiced banana rehearsals. Yes, like dress rehearsals, but for fruit consumption, before formal garden parties. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine or just one big, elaborate flex by society hostesses trying to one-up each other. At one such party, it's said that a banana was served under a silver dome, its presence revealed with the same drama one might reserve for a roast pheasant. The guests clapped, probably out of sheer relief. They didn't have to go first and fumble with the fork. The banana's growing cultural clout also landed it a spot in Victorian art. You approach a display of botanical illustrations, all meticulously detailed, as though the artist fell deeply in love with each stem. But tucked among the ferns and medicinal herbs is something stranger, a still life featuring a banana reclining on a velvet cushion beside a peeled lychee. It's almost suggestive. You raise an eyebrow. Maybe Victorian artists were fruit deprived, or maybe they just saw symbolism in everything. Not to be outdone, literature joined the banana bandwagon. You run your fingers along a glass case filled with yellowing volumes of Victorian verse. One book, Tropicana, Poems from the Colonial Garden, features a now famous line, "O golden arc of sun, thou bendest in foreign soil." Poetic, if slightly dramatic, this particular poem was written by a botanist's wife who had never left England but was reportedly obsessed with the idea of Java. And now, here's a little-known fact. Bananas made their way into children's morality tales. Yes, really. One popular story involved a boy who stole a banana from a conservatory. and was cursed to grow increasingly yellow and bendy until he returned it and apologized. A cautionary tale, though scholars debate whether it was about honesty or simply an effort to keep sticky fingers out of prized plantings. You pass into a quieter alcove where the ceiling dips low and vines curl lazily over the beams. In the middle of the space is a full tea setting, cups, saucers, a tiered tray, and right in the center, a porcelain banana boat. These were real objects, elegant, curved dishes designed specifically to cradle one banana, because once a fruit becomes fashionable, you must accessorize. There's something amusingly excessive about it, isn't there? The banana, humble tropical fruit, turned into a symbol of refinement, a test of etiquette, a prop in high society theatrics. But that's the Victorian way. Elevate the ordinary until it trembles under its own importance. Yet, beneath all the flourishes and fuss, a quieter story hums. You see it now in the corners of the greenhouse where the leaves aren't perfectly trimmed, where a vine has crept somewhere it shouldn't, where an old wooden stool sits permanently askew. This wasn't all about status. For many gardeners and researchers, the banana wasn't just a symbol, it was a living puzzle, a warm-blooded mystery in plant form. One diary entry from a Kew Gardens apprentice in 1886 reads, "I think I've come to love the way they sulk. They do not wilt. They mope. They sigh like drama queens and bounce back with shocking arrogance. I suppose I admire that." You smile. It's hard not to. Somewhere between the etiquette manuals and the poems and the porcelain banana trays, there were real people, tired, muddy, probably slightly too warm, coaxing these plants to live, even when logic said they shouldn't. They tried. They failed. They tried again. They named banana pups after lovers. They cursed when wind snapped the stems. They mourned the losses and celebrated new fruit like proud parents. You glance up, and for a moment, the greenhouse roof catches the last slice of moonlight. It glows faintly like a cathedral window. Everything feels sacred in this moment. Slow, heavy with intention. It's funny, you think, how even the most frivolous histories, banana forks, etiquette dramas, fruity symbolism, contain real feeling if you look close enough. Not just facts, but warmth, the kind that lingers in humid air and folds itself around your shoulders like a soft quilt. So you keep walking deeper into the foliage, letting the shadows deepen, letting the ridiculous and the remarkable blend into one long, quiet, banana-flavored dream. You continue drifting through the shaded corridors of the greenhouse, the air thick with the smell of ripe leaves and damp earth. There's a calm rhythm to the space now, like the world has forgotten to rush. A vine brushes your shoulder as you pass, a soft tap, almost like a sleepy greeting. You pause by a wide, arched window pane, streaked with condensation, outside of which the garden fades into a silver mist. What no one really tells you is that Victorian botanical gardens weren't only about plant obsession or science or showing off to friends with monocles. They were also a kind of imperial dreamscape, miniature empires made of leaves and soil. You find yourself in front of a delicate old map, yellowed and curling at the edges, outlining where each plant in this garden originally came from. The banana's route? Winding, of course, a scribbled trail from Southeast Asia to Africa, then through the Caribbean and into the drawing rooms of England. Victorian plant hunters, some might say plant thieves, journeyed across the globe in pith helmets and linen coats, hauling back everything from rubber trees to orchids, and yes, bananas. These men, sometimes well educated, sometimes laughably unprepared, risked disease, wild animals, and very bad food for the chance to send home a plant no one had seen before. Some survived, some didn't, and some came back with stories far more colorful than the foliage they'd carried. One such character, Thomas Ravenstone, once wrote in a letter, "I have traded 3 pairs of trousers, half a compass, and my left boot for a single Musa sapling. If it lives, I shall name it." Mary, according to later records, lived exactly 5 months before being mistaken for a weed by a drunken assistant and unceremoniously composted. Historians still argue whether Mary's fate was tragic incompetence or an early form of passive-aggressive workplace sabotage. You turn into a narrower passage where banana plants grow in long, orderly rows, each tied carefully to thin wooden supports. These aren't the towering giants you'd find in wild tropical jungles. No, these are coddled, trimmed, overinterpreted specimens, carefully maintained to match Victorian expectations of what a proper banana ought to look like. Neat, respectable, a bit like a plant version of a debutante. But not all bananas fit the mold. Some species refused to fruit. Others grew crooked or droopy, or developed odd freckles. One infamous specimen, known among the gardeners as Old Bent George, produced exactly 3 tiny bananas in 10 years, and spent the rest of the time sulking in a warm corner. Still, he was never discarded. People grew attached. You could argue that the Victorian garden was less about perfection and more about a strange, leafy kind of affection. Further down, a small display catches your eye. Drawings and notes clipped together with a rusted pin. These are from failed hybrids. Victorians, in their usual enthusiasm for tinkering, attempted to cross bananas with everything. Apples, grapes, even turnips, for reasons lost to time. The results were rarely edible, but occasionally hilarious. One gardener's scribbled complaint reads, "Banapple, day 43, continues to smell like shoes." Banana hybridization wasn't all silliness, though. It marked the beginning of what we now recognize as agricultural science. These early experiments, as half-baked as they were, laid groundwork for modern crop development. The same tools used to try and make a banana that tasted like strawberries now help us design drought-resistant food for entire regions. Sometimes absurd dreams plant practical roots. There's something oddly comforting about that, isn't there? That a Victorian obsession, equal parts colonial fantasy and horticultural passion, could echo into the future, not just as a footnote, but as a foundation. But we're not done with Victorian drama just yet. As you turn another corner, the scene shifts. You find yourself looking at a reconstructed segment of a 19th century banana auction. Yes, banana auctions. They were a thing, because when the fruit became fashionable enough, It wasn't just grown, it was sold with flair. Buyers would gather in the early morning to bid on crates of bananas freshly off the ship, each box labeled with cursive script and exotic names like Queen's Delight or Javan Dream. The whole experience was less farmer's market and more theater. Bananas were displayed like gemstones, their peels polished for shine, their curve angle measured for symmetry. Bidding wars broke out. Scandals followed. One auctioneer, known only as Figsby, was arrested in 1892 for smuggling in bananas under the label of botanical samples to avoid a fruit import tax. His defense: "But sir, they were inspiring bananas." Historians still argue whether Figsby actually believed that or simply liked the thrill of fruity rebellion. But even amid the pomp and powdered wigs of banana theatrics, there were deeper undercurrents. The fruit trade was growing rapidly, especially in British Caribbean colonies. You reach a quiet exhibit space with painted murals of St. Lucia and Dominica, sun-baked hills, banana trees swaying in the breeze, children barefoot in the soil. The murals are idealized, of course, but they hint at the people whose labor made these dream gardens possible. People who didn't sip tea beside porcelain banana boats, but instead hoisted crates under the sun for pennies. It's a sobering thought, softened only slightly by the realization that even in those fields, bananas weren't just work. They were woven into life. Recipes, stories, songs. One gardener wrote that the bananas he received from a Jamaican farmer came with more wisdom than all my lectures combined. He never specified what the farmer said, only that it was something about ripening at your own pace. You sit on a bench made of old teak wood, softened by time. All around you, banana plants stretch upward, as though eavesdropping on your thoughts. There's something eternal in them. Not grand, not loud, just persistent, funny, slightly ridiculous, and very, very alive. It's a good reminder, here in this garden of Victorian dreams and quiet truths, that not everything has to make perfect sense to be perfectly worthwhile. The bananas' journey in Victorian gardens wasn't just about plants or economics. It also carried a surprising dash of theatrical flair. Imagine the garden parties hosted beneath glass domes, where guests, clad in the starched collars and crinolines, would nibble dainty finger sandwiches while admiring exotic banana blossoms, which were often mistaken for giant yellow orchids. You find yourself amid one such imagined gathering, the soft clink of porcelain cups mingling with the faint hum of bees outside. Victorians adored botanical curiosities, and bananas, with their lush leaves and mysterious origin, were the ultimate conversation starters. But they also served as props in a sort of social theater. Bananas were sometimes used in elaborate floral arrangements, or even carved into whimsical centerpieces. One particularly daring gardener once shaped banana leaves into what she called a banana bonnet for a garden fete, a leafy hat that, if you asked around, might have made even Queen Victoria raise an eyebrow. Behind this gentle frivolity was a serious effort to acclimate and cultivate bananas in temperate climates. You wander through narrow corridors of the glasshouses where ingenious heating systems, coal-fired boilers, and circulating hot water pipes kept tropical plants from shivering through harsh English winters. It's a reminder that while Victorian gardens look delicate, their success often depended on mechanical ingenuity and constant human care. A quirky fact to tuck in: Victorian gardeners sometimes swaddled their banana plants in layers of straw and old woolen blankets during the coldest months, creating makeshift banana burritos to fend off frostbite. Imagine a banana plant wrapped up snugly, almost like it was tucked into bed. It's a botanical bedtime story in its own right, but you also sense an undercurrent of competition among gardeners, a race to see who could produce the first banana, fruit of the season. Letters between garden clubs brimmed with boastful reports. Our Musa yielded 3 robust bananas this fortnight, or your triumph with Golden Prince is noted, but our Silver Queen ripens faster. These exchanges, equal parts scientific and social, hint at the intense pride these plants inspired. Historians still argue whether this spirit of competition helped advance horticulture or merely fueled a cycle of obsession that distracted from more practical botanical work. Either way, it added a charming human touch to the world of Victorian plants. You then come across a curious side note. Victorian medical manuals sometimes recommended bananas as part of a genteel diet to soothe nervous disorders or delicate digestion. This was the era when doctors often prescribed fruit therapy alongside things like fresh air and rest. It's oddly comforting to think that while Victorians fussed over their banana bonnets, they also quietly believed these fruits could calm jittery nerves. Just the thing to help you wind down tonight as you gently trace a finger over a botanical illustration of a banana flower, its petals unfolding like a secret. You remember a tale about a gardener who claimed that banana plants dream of sunshine and rain. Modern science, of course, doesn't confirm such notions, but it does reveal that bananas respond to light with slow, almost hypnotic movements. You can almost see the plant stretching, yawning, or settling in for the night alongside you. There's a soothing rhythm in all this. The slow unfolding of leaves, the patient ripening of fruit, the cycle of care that Victorian gardeners dedicated themselves to with such passion. It's a reminder that sometimes the most boring histories are the ones that let you settle your mind, like a lullaby sung in chlorophyll tones. As you drift past the last of the banana plants, you catch sight of a small handwritten sign that reads simply, "Patience rewarded," a fitting motto for a garden, a fruit, and maybe even for you tonight. As you continue wandering through the lush Victorian botanical gardens, the banana plant shares its stage with another unsung hero, the humble insect. You spot a small group of gardeners releasing tiny wasps and beetles among the banana blossoms, their mission to aid in pollination. While bananas you see today are mostly cultivated through cloning, Victorian gardeners were fascinated by natural pollination and often experimented with encouraging local insects to help fruit production. You might imagine the gentle buzz of these insects, like a soft, steady whisper, weaving between the large banana leaves. Victorian naturalists documented the relationship between plants and insects meticulously, believing that every bee or beetle played a tiny but crucial part in the grand design of the gardens. Sometimes these studies veered into the odd and quirky. One botanist noted that certain wasps seemed to prefer banana flowers over all other blossoms, a preference he called a delicate obsession. At the same time, gardeners faced challenges with pests. Aphids and scale insects often threatened these prized banana plants. In response, Victorians sometimes resorted to homemade remedies, including mixtures of soap and tobacco water, or even sprinkling powdered lime to keep invaders at bay. You picture a gardener carefully spraying a banana leaf, his hands steady but eyes watchful, like a caretaker warding off unseen enemies. Historians still argue whether Victorian gardeners' obsessive pest control actually improved yields, or if it sometimes disrupted the natural balance, making the plants more vulnerable in the long run. It's a reminder that even well-intended efforts can have unexpected consequences, much like the ups and downs of human history. An amusing aside here, some Victorian horticulturists believed music might affect plant growth. There were experiments where banana plants were serenaded with gentle classical melodies or the soft strumming of a harp. While modern science remains skeptical, it's a charming image. Bananas swaying gently to Beethoven, perhaps dreaming of sunnier days. Meanwhile, the gardeners themselves found comfort in their work. Tending to banana plants was seen as a calming pastime, almost meditative. The slow, repetitive tasks of pruning, watering, and inspecting leaves provided a soothing rhythm to counterbalance the hectic pace of Victorian city life. You might imagine yourself in one of these greenhouses, the scent of damp earth mingling with banana blossoms, a peaceful refuge from the outside world. The banana's role in these gardens extended beyond botany and horticulture. It also became a symbol of exoticism and empire, a living reminder of distant lands and global connections. This was the age when the British Empire was at its height, and banana plants served as a quiet emblem of the empire's reach into tropical territories. Displaying a flourishing banana plant was a way for Victorian gardeners and their guests to feel connected to far-off places without leaving the comfort of home. You might find it comforting to know that while the world outside was bustling with industry and change, inside these glass houses, time slowed, and the simple act of watching a banana plant grow could become a moment of stillness and calm. As you keep strolling through the Victorian Botanical Gardens, you encounter the fascinating story of how bananas influenced art and literature of the era. It's easy to overlook, but bananas made their way into the cultural imagination, inspiring poets, painters, and even children's stories. You might picture an artist standing before a large bunch of bananas, trying to capture their bright, curved shapes and glossy leaves on canvas, while a gentle breeze ruffles the edges of the paper. Victorian painters often used banana plants as symbols of lushness, exoticism, and even quiet luxury. One favorite theme was the banana leaf as a decorative motif, featuring in wallpapers, fabrics, and ceramics. The bold, arching shapes of banana leaves added a tropical flair to otherwise staid Victorian interiors. You can almost hear the faint rustle of these leaves woven into delicate chintz patterns as you sink deeper into the garden's atmosphere. Writers, too, took note. Some children's books from the period featured banana trees as mysterious and magical places, safe havens where adventure and curiosity bloomed. It was a way to bring the faraway tropics into the cozy parlors of England, fueling imaginations during long winter evenings. You might imagine a child curled up with a book, the flicker of candlelight illuminating tales of distant banana groves filled with friendly creatures and hidden secrets. But not all cultural references were so flattering. Bananas sometimes symbolized colonial excess or the strange mixture of beauty and exploitation inherent in the empire's expansion. Victorian commentators occasionally used banana imagery to hint at the complicated realities behind seemingly harmless exotic plants, an early form of what we might now call bananas and empire critique. Historians still argue whether these subtle references genuinely influenced public opinion or were confined to intellectual circles. You might smile at a quirky detail. Some Victorian ladies wore banana-shaped brooches, crafted from enamel and gold, which became surprisingly fashionable for a brief moment. It was, perhaps, the ultimate conversation starter at a garden party. Why, yes, I do have a banana on my lapel. Thank you for noticing. Meanwhile, the banana's slow but steady rise in popularity also sparked culinary curiosity. Victorian cookbooks began to include banana recipes, mostly desserts like puddings and custards, that made use of this exotic fruit's creamy texture and gentle sweetness. Imagine the comforting aroma of banana cake baking in a kitchen filled with floral china and lace curtains. Through it all, you see how the banana quietly wove itself into the fabric of Victorian life, not just as a plant, but as a symbol, a muse, and a link to faraway worlds. It's a gentle reminder that even the most mundane objects can hold stories waiting to be discovered, perfect for drifting off to sleep. Continuing your walk through the gentle, fragrant air of the Victorian Botanical Gardens, you find yourself drawn to the story of how bananas were woven into Victorian health and wellness ideas. The Victorians had a complicated relationship with diet and medicine, and bananas were often seen as a gentle, nourishing food, perfect for those recovering from illness or in need of nervous system strengthening. You can almost feel the soft, creamy texture of a ripe banana soothing in your mouth like a whispered reassurance. Doctors of the time recommended bananas as part of a bland diet, believing their natural sugars and easy digestibility made them ideal for convalescence. They were often prescribed to those suffering from digestive troubles or fatigue, a simple tonic for the weary soul. Some medical guides suggested, picture a Victorian nurse carefully peeling a banana and handing it over with a smile, the soft rustle of hospital linens in the background. Yet, there was also a more experimental side to Victorian medicine involving bananas. Some practitioners believed that banana skins, when boiled into a tea or applied as a poultice, could help soothe skin irritations or minor wounds. This practice was certainly not mainstream, but it found curious supporters in botanical medicine circles. You might find it oddly soothing to imagine a banana peel compressed gently resting on a troubled spot, a natural remedy from the garden itself. At the same time, bananas found a place in Victorian mental health theories. Some suggested that eating bananas could calm nervous excitement a broad term often used for everything from anxiety to mild insomnia. It's tempting to see this as a precursor to modern ideas about diet and mood. You might even picture yourself late at night, nibbling on a banana as you settle in to relax. Historians still argue whether these health claims were more hopeful than factual, or if bananas genuinely played a small but meaningful role in Victorian wellness practices. Either way, it's a gentle example of how people have long sought comfort in the simplest things. A quirky note: Victorian children's health guides sometimes suggested banana juice as a remedy for growing pains. You can imagine a concerned parent quietly mixing banana puree with water, hoping to ease the night's aches. As you breathe in the soft, sweet scent lingering in the garden air, you appreciate how the banana was more than just a fruit in Victorian times. It was a source of comfort, healing, and quiet hope. As you move gently onward through the calming garden paths, your thoughts turn to the banana's subtle role in Victorian social rituals and etiquette. The Victorians were famously particular about manners and social codes, and even a banana could be wrapped in layers of unspoken rules. Imagine a garden party, the air thick with polite conversation and the faint scent of blooming flowers, where the simple act of serving a banana required a touch of careful consideration. Bananas, often regarded as delicate and somewhat exotic, were not casually eaten like apples or pears. They were served peeled and sliced, usually accompanied by custards or creams, on fine porcelain plates with silver forks. You might imagine the slow, deliberate peeling of a banana done with the utmost care as guests watched politely, mindful not to offend. It was an event in itself, a small ceremony reflecting the host's refinement and worldly knowledge. In addition to formal meals, bananas found their way into Victorian gift-giving customs. It was not unusual for a basket of fresh fruit, including bananas, to be sent as a thoughtful gift to friends or acquaintances recovering from illness. These fruit baskets symbolized care and well wishes, wrapped in ribbons and often accompanied by handwritten notes. You picture a delicate hand tying a ribbon around a basket, the banana nestled among apples and grapes like a golden secret. Interestingly, Victorian etiquette books sometimes cautioned against discussing the banana's tropical origins too openly during polite company, as the imperialist undertones could provoke discomfort. Instead, the banana was to be admired quietly for its taste and texture, allowing its more complicated cultural meanings to remain unspoken. Historians still debate how much these social nuances influenced the fruit's popularity versus its simple culinary appeal. A quirky tidbit: some Victorian etiquette guides humorously warned against the banana's slipperiness, both as a fruit and a metaphor for social faux pas. The phrase, "don't slip on a banana peel," was just beginning to enter popular culture, although no one then realized it would become a staple of slapstick comedy decades later. You might chuckle softly, imagining a Victorian gentleman cautiously navigating a garden path, eyes lowered to avoid any literal banana peel mishaps, while his peers chuckle behind their fans. It's a gentle reminder that even in the most refined settings, life has its little slips. This social dance around the banana reflects the broader Victorian balancing act between fascination with the exotic and a desire for decorum. It's a delicate rhythm, much like the slow sway of banana leaves in the garden breeze, inviting you to unwind further as the story softly drifts onward. The twilight deepens as you wander further into the botanical garden's quiet corners, and you find yourself drawn to the story of Victorian scientific curiosity around bananas, especially their role in early plant hybrid experiments. The Victorians were relentless experimenters, always eager to push the boundaries of horticulture. You imagine a sunlit greenhouse filled with the gentle buzz of bees and the faint scent of damp earth, where scientists carefully cross-pollinate banana plants in the name of progress. Victorian botanists sought to breed bananas that could thrive in colder climates or resist disease, experimenting with various hybrids and cultivars. They recorded each attempt meticulously, noting differences in leaf shape, fruit size, and taste. You might see a scientist gently holding a banana flower, the petals delicate and pale, as he transfers pollen with a tiny brush. These early experiments laid the groundwork for the commercial banana varieties we recognize today. A quirky detail emerges. Some hybrid banana plants produced fruits with curious shapes or unexpected colors, leading to occasional bursts of amusement and confusion among gardeners. Imagine a banana that looks almost purple, or one with tiny ridges. These oddities were a source of both frustration and delight. It's easy to picture a Victorian gardener holding up such a fruit with a raised eyebrow, muttering something about the eccentricities of nature. Historians still argue whether these early hybridization efforts significantly influenced global banana cultivation or were more limited to botanical curiosities. Regardless, the pursuit of better bananas embodies the Victorian spirit of experimentation and the blending of science with daily life. Meanwhile, the botanical gardens served as hubs for sharing this knowledge with lectures, exhibitions, and displays designed to educate and inspire the public. You might hear the soft murmur of visitors discussing the latest hybrid bananas, their voices mingling with the rustling leaves. As you breathe in the cool, damp air of the greenhouse, the story of Victorian banana hybrids reminds you how even the most humble fruit can inspire curiosity, patience, and wonder. It's a fitting note as the evening's tale nears its gentle close, inviting you to settle deeper into calm. You now find yourself in the soft shadow of the garden's closing hours, where the stories of bananas in Victorian botanical gardens settle like a gentle dusk. This final section invites you to reflect on how such a simple fruit could weave through the fabric of science, society, health, and leisure, creating a quiet tapestry of Victorian life. Imagine the last golden light filtering through banana leaves, casting dappled patterns on worn stone paths, as the gardens hush into evening calm. By this time, bananas were more than just food. They had become symbols of connection between the far-flung reaches of the British Empire and the manicured gardens of London. You picture crates of bananas arriving from tropical plantations, their arrival a small but exciting event for gardeners and merchants alike, marking the blending of global trade and domestic leisure. Victorian gardeners often kept detailed journals, noting the growth cycles of their banana plants and celebrating each successful harvest with quiet pride. It's soothing to imagine these notes, written in delicate script, describing the plant's progress as if they were cherished friends. Sometimes, these journals mention the challenges of pests or weather, reminding us of the patient persistence required to cultivate such exotic fruits. A quirky Victorian pastime involved banana-themed poetry and songs, little known today, but once popular among literary circles. These playful works celebrated the banana's exotic charm and its curious place in everyday life. You might smile imagining a Victorian salon, with guests reciting light-hearted verses about bananas while sipping tea under banana fronds. Historians still debate how much these cultural layers influenced banana cultivation practices versus practical horticultural concerns. Either way, the banana story in Victorian botanical gardens is a gentle reminder of how nature and culture intertwine, creating quiet moments of beauty and curiosity. As the garden gates softly close and night settles fully, you feel the peaceful echo of the day's journey, the banana's story, a calming companion to your rest. The garden is still now, the last whispers of the day fading gently into the night. Imagine yourself sinking slowly into a soft, warm bed beneath a canopy of stars, the gentle rustling of banana leaves in a distant tropical breeze, lulling you further into calm. Your breathing slows, your muscles relax, and the quiet hum of the world outside slips away, leaving only peace. Let your thoughts drift, soft and slow, like the dappled light playing on banana leaves. There is nothing to do now but rest, to let the gentle stories of Victorian gardens and bananas fade like a lullaby, soothing your mind and body toward a deep, restful sleep. Sleep well, and may your dreams be sweet and untroubled.